I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all of the difference. There are many secrets and mysteries in this world, strange places and events that call out to us to explore and investigate. These realms of the unknown and the unexplained are waiting for us, just over the horizon and down a dark road. Join your host, Dennis Carroll and Gerald Fountain, as we take the road less traveled.
Hello out there in podcast land, ladies and gentlemen. I am your humble host. I hope tonight I'm your ghost host with the most, Dennis Carroll, and this is another edition of The Road Less Traveled. Boy, we have a strange, deep, dark road to go down tonight, folks. Absolutely. And I want to bring up my fellow voyager here on this interesting journey, Mr. Gerald Fountain.
Hello.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we are definitely hunting for ghosts. Okay, we're going to look at the interesting aspect of haunted hotels and haunted restaurants and other places like that. Ghosts on the go here, folks. Absolutely.
That's right.
And I want to welcome you all here tonight. Gerald, you doing okay, bud?
Absolutely. Doing great.
You ready to roll in?
I'm ready.
You ready to roll? All right. He said he was born ready. All right. Yeah. I want to start welcoming some of you in. Jessica's in the house. Our good friend Jessica, the Cryptid Hunters, had a fantastic show with her today. If you missed it, please go check out her channel, the Cryptid Huntress. And also, while you're there, check out War Woman Goods, her store, and tell her we sent you. Okay, absolutely.
That's right.
I don't know if you'll get a disc. You won't get a discount, but you can mention us anyway. But it was a great show. Go check it out. It will also be on my library. You're quite welcome. It's always a pleasure to join you, Jessica. Absolutely. We have some very, very, shall I say, interesting conversations. Absolutely. And also want to mention Gerald has a store. Is that right,
yeah.
Gerald?
That's right. Yep. You can find us at Midwest Night Watchers at Printful, and you can get your Space Penguins t-shirt there if you want.
Some of the merchandise there. All right. Now, hey, you put that back when you get to it. Jane is watching you, okay?
That's right.
Watching you close, all right?
I love me some Space Penguins, so there you go.
All right. I've been in your store. Here's a link right here for it. Let's throw it up on the screen. Yeah, I've been in your store, but haven't been lately. I need to go back and check. I know you got some more different stuff in there.
My favorite so far is these 3/4 sleeves are starting to come back. So they're 3/4 instead of long sleeves. And we used to wear them all the time in junior high and high school. They're awesome.
Ooh, that's perfect for summer.
Yeah, it's real lightweight, so it's nice. You can go in between summer and spring, and
it might help keep the mosquitoes away a little bit. I'll make it harder for them to eat you. Okay. Absolutely. But let's see. We're starting to load up here. We've got somebody named Miss Shira. You might recognize her.
Oh yeah.
No, we got Monica Davis. Hello. We've got Dawn Morris, and let's see who else we got. We're starting to load up good. Kyle Smith is in the house. Queen of 10,000 Moons. I love that name.
Oh, that's a good one.
Queen of 10,000 Moons. Boy, that's a lot of moons. Absolutely. We got Overbuilt in the house. Annie. All right. Welcome you all aboard. It's going to be an interesting night. I've got some weird stories to tell. Gerald's got some weird stories to tell, so let's get with it. We're going to go journey down the road less traveled and looking for some ghosts. I'm going to tell you something right off the bat. You know, our good friend Dacre Stoker that you and I both had on our shows, and we interviewed together one time. He lives in Aiken, South Carolina, which is not very far from me. I think probably maybe a half an hour, 45 minutes away, something like that. Anyway, he lives in Aiken, and I had a big investigation there one night, Gerald, in I think it's an 8-story hotel that I investigated. And it had 8 stories, I don't know how many rooms, and it had like 6 bars in it, and you can imagine what kind of nightlife was going on there.
Oh yeah.
So all the spirits were definitely, a bunch of them were in the bottles there for sure. But some of the most haunted places you can go to, Gerald, are hotels and motels and places like that. And I was actually mentioning this to Jessica today. Some people check in and they never check out.
That's right.
And it seems like, here's the weird thing, girl, and I know you know this too as well. It seems like sometimes when people are going to, and I'll say it in a nice way, unalive themselves, they seem to want to check into a motel and do it.
Absolutely.
You know, that's the way. That's a sad fact, but it happens. You know, and so a lot of these hotels end up with trauma and death attached to them. And you know, I'm thinking about the very famous one in Los Angeles that we got to definitely fly out and check out one day, Gerald. But the one with the lady in the water tank, you know, the El Salam mystery that went on with that hotel out there. You want to talk about that in a minute? You know about some of that.
Yeah, I can. Actually, I think I have some pictures from that even.
Okay.
Let's see. Let's bring that up. So the Cecil Hotel is, I think, the one you're talking about, right? Right? Is that the one you're talking about, the Cecil Hotel?
Mm-hmm.
So the Cecil Hotel has a lot of strange history with it.
Also, is it not got a connection with the Black Dahlia mystery?
Absolutely. It's got a long history of creepy stuff. I mean, it's already in Skid Row, if you want to call it Skid Row in L.A., low district.
I have always been interested in crime, which is one of the reasons I went into law enforcement. It's fascinating. You know, criminology is wild, okay? And it's sort of a second love of mine. And I have studied the Black Dahlia thing immensely. I've done tons of research on it. And the connections it has with the Cecil are very interesting. And there's something about Los Angeles. Well, I like to call it the city of Los Angeles. There's something about, there's some weird vibes I get on that, Gerald. How do you feel about that?
Absolutely. I mean, LA, Hollywood, I mean, it's all creepy, and the underbelly is just crazy there. I mean, not only that, but like the Rainbow Club, back in the
Oh, yeah.
70s, going into almost 80s, there was a room upstairs that a Hollywood vampire club would meet, and it had Chris Christopherson and some of the monkeys, a Beatle would show up from the rock groups, or some actors that would show up, and they would hang out there, like, from 12 midnight to 4 or 5 in the morning upstairs. And I don't know what they talked about, but they all had their names on a plaque for joining the Hollywood Vampire Club.
That's very interesting. Yeah. Definitely would like to check that out. I've heard a lot about that, and let me circle around back for just a moment back to Elsa Lam. We even have her on video showing her doing some very strange stuff that night.
I have that video.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say that she may not have had mental problems. Yeah, there was something definitely going on with this woman. Okay. But she, and a lot of times when you have mental problems, you get sort of, you think like somebody's after you, or somebody's, watching you. And it does look like she's trying to evade someone or something that you can't see there.
Right.
I noticed that about that part of that. But here's the interesting thing about it, Gerald, and I want to see what you think about it. She actually unalived herself supposedly by climbing in the water tank, and they still to this day can't figure out how she did that. Have you heard about that?
Yeah. They cannot figure it out. And like you said, the elevator video where she's like she's creeped out, suspicious, acting different. And then she's fully clothed in the elevator. Then the next time they find her, she's naked. So, I mean, what happened between there and then? They didn't find her clothes on the roof, as far as I know.
Mm-hmm. Well, now we have somebody here that says she had bipolar. Yeah, I've known a lot of bipolar people in my time, and they definitely can get really freaked out. I had a neighbor like that once, and I had to transport him one time to the mental institute. If you go off your meds, definitely things like this will happen. You become paranoid. You think, people are out to do things to you and all that stuff. I could see that part of it. But there is an interesting other part of this mystery, like Gerald's talking about here, where they can't really figure out exactly, how she did some of this stuff. That's the mystery to this incident.
That was a big deal when it happened. There was a Netflix series about it. There was online groups, mystery solvers online in groups that would go over the video over and over all this footage and try to figure out clues on what happened to her. And I think there's still groups out there online going over the case.
That's true. Yeah, and that sort of like, and here's some weird thing. Now I'm gonna throw this at you and see what you think about it. There's some correlation between this kind of an incident and sort of like the Black Dahlia too. Now, she was may have been a prostitute, and prostitutes, of course, notoriously work motels and hotels. That's where a lot of their clients meet up with them. That's where a lot of business transactions, shall we say, and that may have been why she had a connection to this, But there has been speculation by certain spiritualists, I will give them that name, that Miss Lamb may have been under the influence of other things as well. It's not just mental thing going on. That there may have been something that was connected with something very much like the Black Dahlia. Now, the Black Dahlia, I think, has a strong connection to a serial killer type thing. And they say here's the whole theory. I'm gonna throw it at you right quick. They say that this serial killer is gone now. By the way, because the Black Dahlia happened a very, very long time ago. But the serial killer would be gone. But they say that his spirit is still in this hotel.
Wow.
and still doing stuff to women sometimes. Okay.
Right.
And let me say this, hold that thought. Here's the interesting thing. Remember what Charles Manson said? Said, you may put me in jail. You may put me away for the rest of my days, but my spirit will walk your streets every night.
Oh.
Now, let me say something about serial killers, folks. You don't get any much more demonic than serial killers, okay? That's why that's always I found interesting about serial killers. Don't you think so, Gerald? They are downright demonic. I think most of the time they are demonically controlled.
And Cecil Hotel has had many instances of that. So the Cecil Hotel is part of the DTLA, which is downtown Los Angeles suicide triangle. Mm-hmm. So you got the Cecil Hotel on one side, then you got the Hayward Hotel, and then you got the Grand Hotel, and it makes a triangle downtown. And that's where all the suicides have happened, between these hotels and inside of that triangle on the streets.
Right.
Including
like a dark area.
Richard Ramirez.
Yeah, the Night Stalker. Yeah, another.
He was in the Cecil Hotel.
And you know what? A lot of people do not realize guess what? He was very satanic, girl. Very.
Well, speaking of that, here's his court picture, and look at his face.
Mm-hmm. Look at that. I mean, that's pure evil, folks. Come on.
You tell me whether his soul is gone or not.
But I tell you what, that's evil looking back at you. And I have seen that in person, girl. I have seen eyes like that in person. When you see something like that, you know that what you're dealing with goes beyond human. Yeah. And that's the interesting thing. And here's what my point on this all. Like you're talking about this triangle of darkness here, where suicides and all this take place. A lot of people speculate that this is what the spirits of serial killers do. There's still demonic spirits that are left in these areas, and they are a spirit of death, suicide, and murder, torture and death, and all this stuff. These are perfect, what you would describe as perfect demonic spirits. And if they still dwell in these places, they're still operating. They may not be inhabiting somebody and doing things, and I think they do that a lot. But even when they're not inhabiting a person like that guy there, they're still doing their work. See what I'm saying?
Right.
They're still influencing that area.
Yeah, we've talked about that many times.
What do you think about that?
When such traumatic things happen, like suicides, murder, all this stuff happens, and over in that same location, you start to it's almost like there's a curse on that land. So it could be inside that triangle because those three hotels have such a high suicide rate. But I mean, there's such a traumatic experience that's attached to that property.
Let me say this to everybody listening right quick. When you talk about haunted places, you don't just mean places that can be haunted by human spirits, right, Gerald? They can be demonic spirits that haunt places as well.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's why, I warn people so much over, Gerald. Many over and over, and you've done it too. You warn people you need to protect yourself going into some of these places, folks. Protect yourself, so not just physically and have a gun on you or whatever the situation is. And I'm not talking about just that. That's good to have too, by the way. It takes care of the physical stuff that you may encounter. But also, you better be spiritually protected and mentally protected and emotionally protected when you walk into these places, because the influence can do things to you that ain't good.
Right.
And I think that may be what happened to that poor lady in the water tank. There's an old saying, Gerald, and you gotta always remember this, folks. Evil never dies. It never dies. You can't bury it, my friend. It's gonna always hang around somewhere, in some form or another, or some way or another. It just don't go away. One day evil will be eradicated completely out of our and won't be a problem with us anymore one day. But that day ain't here yet. But you got to remember that is the very nature of evil. We had people over the years, Gerald. I'm gonna say this right quick before we get into some more stuff. People have come to me over the years, can you eradicate these evil places in my house? Can you do this? Can you cleanse these? And I say, well, it ain't me, by the way. It's God that does that. I don't take credit for it, okay? Because I can't do that on my own. But, okay, I say, look, unless you have strong faith, okay, I can clear your house out. By the power of God, I can clear it out. But unless you have strong faith, you're not going to maintain that. Because evil, once you throw it out, even Jesus said that in the Bible with the demon act. Go back and remember that very famous thing. He said, get that man, get him to church, feed him, clothe him, because if they come back and find him empty spiritually, they're going to take him over again. That's just the way evil does, folks. Yep. You can throw it out, but it'll come right back. That's how mean and persistent it is, okay? And it's going to work that way. So you got to understand that evil never dies.
That's right.
And that's what these places we're talking about tonight. When they got this influence of evil, when they got these bad places, and like I mentioned that on Jessica's show today, I have been to murder sites and places where people, you get that freaky bad feeling. If you're in touch in any way with your inner soul, my friends, you will feel that, okay? You'll pick up on it. It's just like that, that all feeling we all get with somebody or something is watching us. And we feel that, Girl and I have talked about that a lot. That's a jungle instinct, folks, okay? Built into us. But there's a spiritual part of it too, right, Drew?
That's right.
But you pay attention to that because you're going to run. If you run into something like that, you better be preparing to protect yourself and people with you because you can have some very bad problems. And like I've said before, I have had cases where people have come to me and said, I got to leave. I can't even think straight anymore. I can't even put thoughts together anymore.
Right.
And that's the way these things can attack you. And you got to be ready for it. The smart soldier does not walk out onto the battlefield unarmed. That's just the way that works, folks. So if you decide to go to some of these places we're talking about tonight, you might want to prepare yourself.
And all the pictures and places I'm showing tonight, you can actually go and stay there. Whether it's a bed and breakfast or a hotel, they're all still in existence. And there's actually a place online for haunted house tours and hotel stays. You can go actually book right online all across the country to any haunted hotel or bed and breakfast you'd like to go stay at.
Absolutely. There's the Stanley Hotel, too, the very famous Stanley Hotel that a lot of ghost hunts are connected at and all that. And let me tell you a quick story. I spent one night at a bed and breakfast in Charleston, a haunted bed and breakfast. I should have told you the name of it, John. You could put a picture of it up, but I don't have the name of it right offhand. But anyway, it's very famous. And what happened there is that there was a duel outside, and the young man lost the duel, and he made it back to the bed. It was his house at that time. It wasn't a bed and breakfast. Okay, he lived there, and he made it back to the house and halfway up the stairs before he died. And they say that this is recreated every night.
Oh,
and that night I stayed there. I did not sleep at all. Okay. And I had some very freaky stuff happen. Okay. Nothing you could really put your finger on, unfortunately, and say, hey, this is this, this is this. But there were all kinds of creaky sounds on the stair out there, like somebody walking up the stairs. A lot of weird stuff. The woman that owned the place said that it will only happen after midnight. And you hear the door open or something, and you hear somebody going up the stairs, and they never make it all the way halfway up the stairs.
Wow.
And it's him coming back, supposedly, time after time after time, never making it back. His last thoughts on earth were trying to get back to his, I think his mother and his father lived there, and trying to get back to them before he died and collapsed on the stairs. It was a freaking night, all night long. Weird noises in that house, okay? Weird cold spots, stuff like that. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures or anything I get to show you. Nothing like that showed up on pictures, okay? But you can experience these things wherever you stay, no matter what, whether it's a well-known place or not. You never know, because like we said at the beginning, people unalive themselves here, or very bad things happen, murders take place, whatever the situation, it's going to leave that behind. Absolutely.
Yep.
Is that the Stanley right there? Is that?
Yeah, I had the Stanley ready to go, and everybody knows this hotel or lodge from The Shining.
Yeah, very, very well known for that. Here's Johnny.
If you go stay there, they actually have haunted tours in the Stanley, and down in the basement supposedly is an empty room where weird stuff happens, and people have had seances and all kinds of rituals held down there in the basement. So obviously that space has some negativity to it. So just a warning, if you go there and you specifically go to that room down in the basement, you know what you're in for.
Well, the one I've always wanted to investigate, Gerald, is the little girl in the on the stairs in the hall that people see, the one bouncing the ball. That's the one I wanted to look for. But
there's actually several different spots in the hotel that have apparitions and all kinds of weird stuff happening.
Mm-hmm. The hotel, just looking at hotels like that, they're sort of a macronism of a city in a way, like a little small city kind of a thing. You got a lot of people that are living there, a lot of interaction going on. It is a perfect formula for hauntings, is it not?
Right. I mean, you have such a diverse people, let alone the staff. You don't even know who all the staff are and what their background is and where they come from. I mean, just like here around us, we have the state park, Starved Rock, and they have a lodge there. Well, there was murders in the state park in a cavern, and they found a body of a young woman, and it turned out it was the hired help. It was like one of the cooks was arrested and charged with the murder. So you don't know where even the hired help come from or what their background is a lot of times.
That's interesting. The staff are living there too in a way. There's a lot of interaction with the staff as well. And of course, they know a lot of what's going on there anyway, because they stay there and spend most of their time there, whereas the visitors don't. That was who I would definitely interview. I would like to talk to the maids and the bell boys, the luggage guys and all that. I would like to talk to them. That he would tell you the most probably. I don't think the managers would be too open about it, but the staff would, I think, And right. I've actually done that. I've encountered park rangers in certain very famous historical places, and they will not tell you anything like that. They won't. They don't. They are ordered. Actually ordered not to federal park rangers, okay, and state too for that matter. They are ordered not to talk about stuff like that. A lot of times I went out to Fort Sumter, and there was a lot of death and carnage at Fort Sumter, South Carolina, and I was out there with the rangers talking to them, and I asked one of them point blank. I said she was a cute little ranger too. I was kind of flirting with her. And I said, can you tell me, come on now, I'd like to spend the night out here. Is this place haunted? There's weird stuff going on out here. And she kind of looks at me, She said, sir, we're not allowed to talk about that, but what do you think?
Yep.
That kind of answered my question.
In a lot of instances, these hotels and the places that have these murders or suicides, some of it is the staff. There's many, many cases where the cooks or the maids or the maintenance men have had problems in their lives or something going on or conflicts in the hotel, and they end up getting knocked off themselves. So it's not always the guests.
Well, I don't know. No, if you're familiar with this, Gerald, let me think. When I'm thinking about it, I'm gonna bring it up. There is a security camera footage of a guard, a security guy, talking to someone in a hall. You remember that?
Yes, I've seen that video.
I don't know. This may have been an office building, but I think it was a hotel. I think it was a hotel. But anyway, he's talking to somebody, and on the film, you can't see anybody there.
Right.
And he's talking to somebody, and they ask him later on, here's the end of the story. They asked him, "Well, who were you talking to?" And he said, "Well, that was Mr. Brown. He lives in that room or something. He come out and asked me something." And he said, "Brother, you can't have done that because Mr. Brown died 2 weeks ago."
That's some weird stuff, isn't it?
That's freaky.
Yeah, it is.
But there's a lot of things. I'll tell you another place like that, Gerald, and we'll get some more photos here. But another place much like, because I worked there for 30 years, are haunted hospitals. Hospitals are haunted to the high heavens, my friends.
Oh, yeah.
One of the most haunted places on earth. Whether they be mental hospitals, just regular hospitals, okay? Because you got a lot of trauma and death, suffering, and pain going on there. You got a bunch of that stuff, and that is some of the most frightening ghost stories I have ever heard have come out of hospitals and have been given to me by nurses. Wild stuff, man. So we'd have to put hospitals on your list. Along with battlefields, definitely. That's one place we need to fly to again. When we get that jet, we're going there, Gerald. We're going to Gettysburg, okay?
We got a lot of places. We're going to have to make a tour of it because we got a lot of places to go to when we get our jet.
Yeah. World tour, world ghost tour, folks. You come along with us, but you got to pay. All right? Got to help pay for the gas. All right. But anyway. Yeah, what else we got? You got some more pictures for us, sir?
Oh, yes. So this is the Blackhawk Hotel, and it was really hopping in the 30s and 40s, and even Cary Grant and some movie stars stayed there. But Cary Grant suffered a stroke in the hotel lobby. And also there's a woman that shows up in vintage style, the 40s, 20s, vintage style evening gowns, and wanders the hallways while you're there. And they say Cary Grant comes back and you can find him hanging out. And so I showed you the old picture, which is this front part. So the original building is this. And then they added on to it, obviously. So this is how you would see it today. Wow.
Well, there's a lot of that goes on. Like with the White House is supposed to be very haunted as well. Where there has had, maybe have not died, but very traumatic incidents have happened there, And you hear a lot about people coming back after they die and haunting some of these places. That's interesting, I think even there's one that Marilyn Monroe is attached to in California.
Absolutely.
Her ghost is supposedly seen in a mirror, I think, in the hallway of this hotel.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of which one. I think I have a picture of that one. I'm trying to think of which one it is. I think, the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel.
Another haunted place like that, which happened to pop into my mind, is actually the Empire State Building. There's been a lot of suicides off of one of the observation decks there.
Yep.
That's why it's supposedly haunted as well.
So here's a hot spot, the Bob Mackey Bar and Grill.
Oh yeah, Bob Mackey. I've always wanted to go there. I would definitely like to spend the night in the basement of Bobby Mackey's. Absolutely.
So this is the original building, and it was a distillery back in the old days, and there was a lot of trauma and stuff going on. And one of the
I think someone was murdered in the basement and had their head cut off, something like that.
Yeah, that's just getting to that. That's one of the women got pregnant, and the guy was supposed to take her to get an abortion, but they tried to do it themselves, and she ended up dying, and he didn't know what to do, and he freaked out and decapitated her, and supposedly down in the basement in what they call the portal to hell, they threw her body, and they still haven't found her head as far as I know.
Wild stuff. I think there's a whale in the basement also, isn't there?
That's what the portal to hell is. And during the distillery, they had that well for the fresh water, supposedly, but they said they found weird and unusual stuff, and people kept dumping stuff in there. And so evidently there's more than one body in that old well.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Bob Mackey when he first opened up, bought the place, and then this is him later in life, and from what I understand, he's still alive. But they tore down the place that had the portal to hell, and they built a new place. So you can go to the place where it was, but you can't actually, there's no building there or anything anymore.
Right. I think it was out back or something. One area was where some of that took place.
So this is their sign.
A lot of dark vibes there for that place.
So this is their sign inside there, warning to patrons: this establishment is reported to be haunted. Management is not responsible, cannot be held liable for actions of any ghost spirit on this premises.
This is a famous sign. Yeah, we're not responsible for hauntings and all that. And here's the interesting thing. We're going to get into that in a little while here about the restaurants, haunted restaurants. And I told you about me investigating a haunted Burger King one time, which was very interesting. You got a lot of these hotels have restaurants in them. That's where you went to eat while you stay there. You also eat there, at the restaurants. So A lot of these places are also haunted as well, but there are standalone restaurants that are haunted also, because of things that have happened to them as well. But you got a lot of that with the hotel business. You got a lot of kitchens and stuff like that, And here's the thing about like that hotel I had to investigate, which had 6 bars, folks. Can you imagine that? Okay. All night long. Okay. And I was very frustrated with that. I'll tell you that cook girl, I was frustrated with it because, with way too much noise interference or anything, And the only place I had a little bit of quiet was on the roof. And the reason I investigated the roof, because according to some of the stories, someone threw this stuff off that roof. Oh. And but I had to go listen to this. I had to go up a staircase to get to that roof, and there was no staircase there. It was just a partial staircase. Okay. And I had to walk, the sides of the stairs. There were no steps. I had to walk the sides going up this thing, with about a 10-foot drop under me. So it was very dangerous to do. And I said, I told the manager, when are you ever going to fix those stairs? Come on, my gosh, you might want to go on the roof sometime. But that was real freaky, but you can't invest. It's very frustrating when you got a lot of noise going on. We're showing gigantic pictures on the side of the hotel. There was a football game going on. They had a laser thing going up on that. It was wild, man. It was wild. But anyway, not to mention some of the noise that were coming out of some of the rooms too, by the way. But anyway, it was a very interesting experience. So let me just say this, the reason I bring that up. Although they may be very haunted locations, they are almost unless you got a certain area, downright impossible to investigate. For one reason alone, you'd have to shut the hotel completely down to do it the correct way.
Yep.
And most of them ain't going to do that because they be losing big money. Okay. That's just the way that goes. You're interfering with their bread and butter here. So they're not going to let you do that. But the only thing I was able to do with that hotel in Aiken, I was able to spend the night in what was supposedly the haunted room there, where someone had committed suicide. Not a whole lot happened. It was not a very restful night, though, by the way, to tell you the truth. But not a whole lot happened with that. But that's the only way you could treat it. I investigated the basement. I went from basement to the roof of this place, folks. Okay. I spent like an hour with the owner's daughter, who was very interested in this stuff, in the basement, setting up cameras and doing stuff down there. And it was a very interesting experience. I just brought that up and tell everyone what was going on with that. But that is the obstacles that you encounter when you go out to, investigate or try to find out a lot of stuff that goes on in these places. What we got next, man?
I actually still have pictures from Bob Mackey's. This is the original plaque hanging underneath that warning sign. If I go back to the other picture, you can see it right here in the wood frame. Mm-hmm. So that is this, and it says the crime of the century, which is talking about Pearl, which is Pearl Ryan, age 22. She's the one that was beheaded and dumped into the well. So it's called the crime of the century in the newspapers when it first happened after it came out in the murder trial. So this is what it looked like when Bob was running it. This, is nothing fancy. It's just a honky-tonk country bar, just normal upstairs until you get downstairs. And behind this fence, and that was to keep people away from it. It didn't used to have the fence originally. You could go anywhere down there. This is supposedly the portal of hell. This is where the well was underneath all this. Mm-hmm. So they've cemented, since all that happened, they cemented it all up. And
it wasn't unusual back in the day, Gerald, that you would have a well in the basement because, it was the only water source you had, back in the day. So that's why a lot of these places, barns even have wells in them, on farms and stuff. So you had to get your water supply, and you wanted to make it as convenient as possible when you did,
So that's
what they have indoor plumbing. Indoor plumbing.
When the bar was open, that was not cemented up and it was not barricaded off, so anybody could venture down there. And they had some accidents, so they were afraid of being sued. So they filled it in with cement and put the border around it. And now today, like I said, the building's no longer there and it's all been demolished.
You're always going to have some daredevil adventurers getting into trouble, huh?
Yep. So if you want to go to a bed and breakfast.
Oh, yeah. That's another place that we need to go stay in.
The Lizzy Bordon house.
The Bordon house, yeah. Let me tell you a quick story, and this woman told about the Bordon house. Now it's changed hands here lately several times. Okay, and I don't want to know what price they paid for that place. No telling. But anyway, here's one story I heard about this. That this woman, they would let ghost tours go in there, and they would let ghost groups stay overnight in the house, which would be neat. And said that this one woman, she owned it. She was sort of psychic, She was very sensitive, and said that one day after this, tour, and they shut the house down, they were all getting ready to go home. She's kind of sat down in the chair for a moment just to rest, And she was sitting on one of the sofas in the house. I don't think it was the sofa that Mr. Bordon was on, but it might have been in the same room. I'm not sure. But anyway, she sat down on the sofa, and she said, she said, the longer I sat there, the weirder feeling I got, And she said it wasn't ghostly or anything. It's just weird, weird kind of a feeling. And she said, I got up and I looked up on the, it was an old sofa, And the old sofas, Victorian sofas had legs, very ornate legs on them, and she could look under them. So I looked down there, and there laying on the floor was a Ouija board laying on the thing.
Oh.
And said they had been playing with the Ouija board. And she said I had asked them not to do stuff like that in that house, you know. And said they had been, somebody brought in a Ouija board and been playing with one in there. And said that's the weird, freaky feeling that she was getting. She was picking up vibes off of that Ouija board. I said, yeah, it was probably still hot.
So yeah, you can go.
Are stupid enough to do stuff like that, and with oracles and things, they should be messing with. Definitely should not be messing with.
So you can go on ghost tours.
Mm-hmm.
You can go on ghost tours, and you can spend the night. This is actually a bed and breakfast and museum. So you can schedule for seances. There's been plenty of seances in this place. You can stay in the actual bedrooms. And they do have the living room where Mr. Bordon was murdered, and you can stay in the bedroom where the stepmother was murdered. And so there you go. If you want to go stay at the Lizzy Bordon house, you can.
She was on the other side of that bed. There is where she was found, and Mr. Bordon was found in the parlor on the sofa. What was left of him?
So
she gave her mother 40 whacks, and when she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41.
Yep, I was just getting ready to say we used to jump rope to that.
Yep. That's a very well-known murder case. Another place for much.
Oh, I think Dennis locked up. So hopefully he'll come back here in a minute or two. So yeah, if you want to go to Lizzy Bordon's, you can do that. Like I said, there's websites out there where you can go to all these places and stay, and most of them are bed and breakfasts or active hotels. So you can go on there and schedule, and they even have a road map where you can hit a bunch of them if you want to do a whole tour of all these hotels and places. I'll just kind of show this till Dennis comes back. Here's H.H. Holmes Murder Castle. It's in Chicago. So if anybody remembers the Chicago World's Fair, H.H. Holmes was a doctor, supposedly, got his license. I don't know how valid it was, but he built this hotel. And right before the World's Fair in Chicago, you had all these people coming in and staying, looking for places to stay and rent. And he got a lot of young women to stay in a hotel for cheap, and so they can make their mark in the big city, the White City. They call it the White Devil, or the Devil of White City. H.H. Holmes was the Devil of White City, because if you remember looking at any of the pictures, the Chicago World's Fair was all white. Everything was white at the Chicago World's Fair. So that's why they called it the White City. And there was this is almost like the Winchester house, where there was doors going to nowhere, stairs that ended up not being anywhere. There was trap doors. He even had supposedly the gas lamps. He had pipes going into certain rooms that there was no lights to them. So he would asphyxiate people in their rooms. And this was all going on while he had a woman, or I don't know if it was his wife or not, but she was in there, and supposedly she didn't know anything about all this going on. So he had a way of moving bodies and people in and out of the rooms without her knowing. Supposedly that was the whole case. And there's Mr. H.H. Holmes right there. There's Dennis.
Yep.
There you are. You're back.
Thanks for restless tonight, Joe.
I was just talking about the murder castle for H.H. Holmes.
Oh, yeah, H.H. Holmes. Yeah, that's another freaky place there. You know, a lot of people think he may have been Jack the Ripper, you know.
Yeah, I mean, he was a certified doctor. He got his license somehow before he moved to Chicago.
Yeah. Some of
And right in time, like I was telling everybody, right in time for the Chicago World's Fair, where you had all these people coming in and young people making it to the city to try to make their mark in life, and he ended up attracting them to these low income rooms to stay at.
That's wild. That was a torture palace, was it not? They had cells and stuff in there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
If you go there today, this structure is not there. It's actually a city post office for one of the subdivisions now. So
well,
you
know,
still
I mentioned that today on Jessica's show about how certain rituals require pain and torture because they get a certain amount of dark power out of it. That's one guy right there probably knows all about that.
Yeah. So you can actually go to the property still, but it's not the boarding house or the hotel, whatever you want to call it. It's actually a post office that you can go into.
Of course, definitely one of the most haunted cities in the world is New Orleans. And just about every restaurant in New Orleans, and that includes the hotels as well, are haunted. The haunted if they're not haunted by voodoo and vampires, they're haunted by pirates, okay? Or just regular suicidal ghosts and stuff like that. But that's interesting too. And England is the same way. London is the same way too, which made me think about that when we were talking about Jack the Ripper. Because, and I talked to somebody in England about that once, and I was on a show over there, and I said, when we talk about history, we're going back maybe 300 years. When you talk history, you're going back about 1,000 years. You're going way back further than that. And so you're bound to have a lot more haunted locations than we have. But that reminds me of the basement of now listen to this. This is wild, folks. And it's one of my favorite ghost stories. But there is I cannot think of the pub, okay, but it's in London. And in the basement, several times, people have encountered ghosts, not just your regular kind of ghost here, but the ghost of Roman cavalry soldiers.
Oh, wow.
Going down to the basement, folks, on horses. Okay. Several times this has been reported that they're cavalry, Roman mounted cavalry.
Yep.
Wow. Think about that. That's strange. That's what you find in one pub in London. Think about it.
Well, when these buildings that we live in now were not constructed when a lot of this stuff happened. So these walls that we physically have were not there at the time. So if they're in another dimension or they're just like a repeat of an event, though our physical walls would not impede them. So you could have soldiers marching through your house and just walking through walls like nothing, or horses, like you said.
Well, that's what happens with residual haunting. Residual doesn't see you, and they don't acknowledge you being there. They can walk through the wall in front of you. They're just doing their regular, same old everyday stuff. So really, I think that's more or less not an actual spiritual thing, but more like looking back in time to a certain extent. I think you're kind of piercing the veil of space and time and seeing an event from long ago, a memory of it, the ghost of a memory, if you want to put it that way, folks. That's what it is, the ghost of a memory. And Gerald, I've often thought about this. Could we not be ghosts to some people in the future? That's freaky to think about,
There was a show, a radio program that I listened to that somebody told a story of when they lived on a farm. They came in through the kitchen, out from the fields into the kitchen. And then when they walked in, looking into the living room, there was a grandma or an older lady knitting in a rocking chair. And when they walked in, she looked surprised and freaked out, like she could see them. And they were obviously freaked out because they could see her. And so they left. not trying to figure out. And the next time they come in, she's gone. Well, when they did the history of the house, they found relatives, and they told the people that owned the farm then that their grandmother always told a story where she was sitting there knitting in the rocking chair, and all of a sudden these two strange men came through the kitchen in weird clothes and frightened her. She was scared. So you had two instances of two different time periods where they saw each other.
That's wild. Some things like that can happen definitely in the space-time continuum. I know the story of one lady who was working in a modern office building in London, matter of fact, downtown London. And she went up one day into one of the storage rooms in the top of the building, and she was moving some stuff around, and she moved some stuff away from the window. What it was, she was looking for something, some kind of file or something. I forget now exactly what it was, but she moved it away from the window and looked out the window and did a double glance, did a double take. What the heck? She looked out the window and she saw London like 100 years ago.
Wow.
Outside that window. And she's going like, what is going on here, And it scared her so bad that she went back down. She immediately, left what she was doing and went back to the office and had her boss said, you got to come see this. You got to come see this. So she took him back up there, and they went to the window and looked out, and everything was normal.
Wow.
Of course, the boss said, are you drinking on the job? Well, what's going on here? She said, well, I'm not prone to hallucinations, but I saw London 100 years ago out that window.
That's crazy.
And there's a very famous incident. We talked about this before, Gerald, about those two school teachers that went on the tour of Versailles Palace in France. Remember that?
Yeah.
We talked about that. They stepped back in time and actually saw Marie Antoinette and some other, and King Louis and all that, They actually saw some of this stuff going on. For just a moment in time, for an afternoon in time, they went back like, 200-300 years, supposedly, and saw this stuff. And they said, here's the weird thing they kept saying over and over again: the day didn't feel right. The day didn't feel right. The atmosphere didn't feel right. It was very oppressive. She said it was almost like, we were having, like on a mountaintop or something, kind of a feeling. And they began to see these things as they walked on. They said, hey, that's, they're in period costume. They got some kind of a thing going on today here, what's going on? And so when they went back the next day and all this stuff was different that they were looking at, they asked somebody that worked there, said, do you have a pageant like that every day, or does it happen a week? Said, ma'am, we don't do things like that here.
Wow.
That's wild. So, but yeah, you definitely some ghostly experiences, Gerald, are definitely time sequences of some sort.
Yep. There's another story that I remember where a young married couple are on their honeymoon, and they're going on their way down the highway, and they see a little offshoot road that says, hotel and stuff, a few miles down the road. So they take it and they go there, and it's like this old Victorian style looking hotel, and they decide to stay the night there, and they check in, and they have this wonderful meal, and they can't believe how low the prices are. And it seemed like they kind of had it in their mind. It seemed like the prices were too low and the people were dressed different, kind of. So they thought, well, maybe they're just wearing attire, for the style of the building, Victorian style. And they get ready to leave, and they get charged, at the end for staying at the hotel. And it was like really cheap. I mean, it was like less than $10, something really cheap for the time that they were going there to stay. And they go on their way, and they have their honeymoon. They come back, and they thought, let's go back to the hotel. Let's go back where we stayed. That was a great place. And they go there and they can't find it. They're on the right road, and they keep going up and down these roads, and they just cannot find it. And they finally stop at a gas station and ask, and the guy told them, yeah, that burnt down in the 1930s. It hasn't been there all this time. So they actually spent the night and ate food there at a place that no longer exists.
And in one version of that story, they go to the place and find just the ruins, of that grown up and overgrown, matter of fact, when I was a kid, I won a writing contest by writing a story about a house that disappears like that with somebody in it. Unfortunately, they disappear with it. Here's a quick story. I'll tell you this. This is freaky. But we were talking about New Orleans earlier. This happened supposedly, I think around last year or something like that. Anyway, this woman was there with some of her friends. So they were, out on the town doing the bad stuff, Got to be bad to have a good time, And they're out bar hopping and doing stuff. And she meets this very attractive man. And she's very tall and kind of pale, blonde, and real nice looking. She's really immediately attracted to this guy. And so they, during this night, they get closer and closer. And he finally tells her, says, I want to show you a place that a lot of tourists never get to see. So I want to show you a special place. And so that should have been a red flag right there, folks. Okay.
Right.
It wasn't for this woman. So anyway, she says, yeah, she's pretty well enamored with this man. And some of her friends later said that this man, she acted like she was under the spell of this man or something, And her friends didn't want her to go with him, but she left and went with her. So anyway, they walked down down into the French Quarter somewhere, and then and got to an alleyway. And he said, "Come on, follow me." And she was kind of, saying, "Where are we going?" And he said, "Well, just trust me. I know a place." So this is a very unusual nightclub.
Oh.
And he said it's called After Midnight. It's called After Midnight. And so he gets in the alleyway, and she said when they get to the alleyway, they're walking down there, and she's like looking around, and there's a green door in the wall. And he goes up to the door, and he knocks 3 times. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. Okay. The door opens immediately, and they go in. They walk in the door, and they're in sort of like it's a basement like. They go down the steps, and there's, lights. There's lights there, but it's a really smoky kind of, looks like a dive, okay?
Right.
And it said there's a man in the corner playing a saxophone, and it's just a weird atmosphere. And people are acting weird here, And they're out sitting around the tables and all that. So he takes her to the bar, Takes her up to the bar, and he says, they know me here. I'm a patron, I come here a lot. And so he says, I'm going to go to the bar and order us a drink. And he said, this drink, I want you to, the waitress is standing there listening to him. The waitress is like a woman standing there. And he tells her, he said, I want you to try this drink. It's called, the name of it is The Second Death.
Oh.
Now, there's another red flag, okay, folks?
Right.
Okay. I'll explain to you in a minute what the second death is. Okay. But anyway, he goes to the bar, and while he's gone, that woman whispers to the woman sitting down there. She's waiting for him to come back. She said, I like you. You're a nice young girl. Said, I want to tell you something. You need to leave now. You do not need to be here after midnight. It's almost midnight. You do not need to be here after midnight. There's a reason why this place is called After Midnight Club. Because if you stay here past midnight and you drink that second death, you will forget everything you know and never be seen in this world again.
Wow.
So the girl gets up and leaves. She gets out the door, she takes off and leaves, And so she goes back and tells her friends. The next morning, she hooks up with her girlfriends and all that. And she tells them, they say, you were drunk. You were on something, you were thinking, this is a bunch of junk. She said, I'll take you back. Let me show you the alleyway. I know where it's at. So she takes her friends to the alley. They walk down the alleyway. She said you could even see her footprints, in the mud, like down in the alley. And they get there, but there's no door there at all.
Huh. Oh my.
Be careful what nightclubs you visit. See?
Right.
And let me tell you what the second death is. What the second death is? Spiritual death. In the Bible, the second death, we will all experience physical death. But you do not want to experience the second death, because that's where you end up in the lake of fire with fallen angels and all the rest of those guys. That's the second death. Why would you name a drink that?
Right.
That's wild. But you know, that's like that story you told, and that there are a lot of buildings supposedly that disappear. I've heard of them doing that in downtown Los Angeles. I've heard of some of them doing that in New York, and like some of these places. If I were going to disguise a spaceship, Gerald, I would make it look like a building and set it down in the middle of a city. You'd never know. You know, it would be the perfect camouflage, because where's the perfect place to hide anything? Plain sight, out in the open.
Yeah, just like the Seattle Space Needle. That always looks that looks like a UFO to me sitting on top.
But what if the devil owns a nightclub called the After Midnight Club?
Oh,
I wouldn't want to go. I wouldn't want to go visit. No, thank you. You might not come back. But you have to wonder. That would also be a perfect trap for humanity. You get somebody to walk into a building, you know, and they never come out. They be like a roach motel for humans. They check in, but they don't check
out. Hotel California.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's another place that definitely would be haunted. Absolutely. Yeah. But there's a lot of history to that stuff like that. Absolutely. And you know, which I mentioned Charleston earlier to you tonight. You know, I had a very interesting experience down there where they hung the pirates, and they would throw their bodies in the swamp and let the alligators eat them. And like I told Gerald, if you want ghosts, that's how you get ghosts. Okay, you desecrate bodies and do stuff like that. You're definitely gonna have trouble later on. But also another thing about Charleston, I investigated the old jail there, and that was one of the most haunted places I've ever been in. And that was also the last abode of Miss Lavinia Fisher. Now, Miss Lavinia Fisher was the United States' first female serial killer.
Oh.
And I have a brick where the gallows hung, where she was hung over. I have a brick that comes from there, by the way.
Wow.
Anyway, one of the reason I mention this is that her crime, her and her husband, they had an inn right outside of Charleston. You checked in there, and most of the time you didn't check out because they knew if you had enough money on you, they had a trap door for you, and it would knock you out, steal your money, cut your throat, and drop you through the trap door. And the trap door would drop you down into the tidal pools. You wash out the food. But that's how they became. They did their business. Okay, and but supposedly to this day, that area where their inn stood is supposed to be very haunted because a lot of the people were unalive there as well. And the only reason they were ever caught is that one man who was looking for his brother had disappeared there. The last place he could see where his brother went was he stayed at this inn. So he went there investigating, and he got very suspicious of him, you know. So he said that night, what it was, they would wait for you to go to sleep. They'd come in, pop you in the head, knock you out, and cut your throat, you know. So that night he stayed awake. He stayed up, you know. And what he did is he fixed the bed to make it look like he was in the bed, and he hid in the closet. And sure enough, about 1 or 2 in the morning, the door slowly opened up. Lavinia and her husband come in, and they pop the thing in the bed on the head. You know, there's nothing there. He comes out of the closet with a gun and, you know, gets them and arrests them. Does a citizen's arrest on them, I guess, or whatever you want to call it. Anyway, that's how they were caught finally. He was one smart guy. I had to hand him that. He knew his business. He might have been like Sherlock Holmes or something. He was a very good investigator. But that's how they finally caught him. So and even back in the day, that was a dangerous sometimes that you run into the wrong people running the wrong establishments. You will not ever be seen again.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of like being shanghaied.
Right.
They used to do that in California a lot.
Yeah, San Francisco, all the
Well, yeah. Next thing you do, you wake up after what they do is slip a drug in your drink, knock you out, drop you through a trap door. Next day, you woke up on board a ship at sea.
Yep.
Bad situation. You know what the captain would tell you? Tell him, I want to go back home. Well, go ahead and start swimming.
That's right. What are you gonna do?
What you gonna do then? Yeah. So a lot of that kind of stuff went on, folks. It was, a lot of people think those were the good old days, girl. Not necessarily. But that's what I was telling you, at the beginning of the show. I believe if I had my druthers, I'd rather stay at an Airbnb than a hotel, knowing some of the reputation of some of these hotels. You might get a better night's sleep in one of those. Except if you don't check into the Airbnb I talked about with the 3 knocks on the door.
Yeah.
They told the woman that checked in, said, we got only one rule. You don't go to the door after midnight, no matter what. Don't open the door after midnight. So at midnight, there's those 3 knocks on the door, and she goes to the door and looks out the peepholes. A nice-looking young man standing out there, very attractive, nice, pale guy. And he said something. Sounds something like said, I think I left my phone in the room or something, And she said that she couldn't hear him, so she cracked the door open. It had a chain on it, She felt like she was okay. She cracked the door and said, what did you say? And he smiled at her and he said, never mind. That's all I needed for you to do.
Wow.
And he walked off. But she said ever since that night, she has been haunted by this thing. He knocks on the window sometimes, 3 knocks on the door after midnight. But she said, I will not go to that door for any reason.
Oh, my.
So be careful about the Airbnbs.
Well,
just in case.
Just like I said earlier, the Lizzy Bordon house is a bread and breakfast now. So there you go. Amityville Horror House was supposedly turned into a bread and breakfast, but now it's been bought and they tore it down. So the Amityville Horror House is no longer there, but it was a bread and breakfast for a while.
And of course, the house where the Charles Manson murders took place, the Sharon Tate murders and all that.
Yeah,
that house has been torn down. But you can, there's another house been built there, but not exactly on the same spot. But they have been reports of paranormal investigators saying that in the driveway of this house is where the house originally stood, where all it took place, that there's some freaky stuff goes on out there in the front yard or whatever.
I think the ranch where the Manson family stayed out in the desert, I think there's still buildings out there.
Yeah, our good friend Bigfoot Dwarf, I've talked with him about that. The Spa Ranch. That's another place that's definitely haunted because there's still bodies out there. No, they don't even know where they're at, And there's another place, girl, that the Manson's family stayed for a while, and that was in a place out in Death Valley. An old bus, and the last time I heard, that bus was still out there, by the way. That would be, I would love to go see that. But Charles Manson, they slept in this old bus that was out there. It was just a piece of a bus, I mean, it didn't have wheels or anything on it.
Wow.
But they say that the last kind that went in there said that there were markings of a swastika on some of the doors of the bus, and they said that was one of Charlie's favorite symbols.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. When he was a young kid, he was tossed around from family member to family member, and he ended up in Peoria, Illinois. It's only 50 miles or 45 miles from us where we live, and he got in trouble as a youngster, a juvenile, and finally he was told he had to leave
jail. Gerald, he did. He spent jail to jail, and he was brutally homosexualized in some of these places by some of the inmates and stuff. He had a very rough life that really twisted his soul, you might say. had a very bad and dark history. If you could look at somebody like that and say, "Hey, they're not going to probably turn out good," you know.
Yeah. So I think
he had relatives in Chicago somewhere up there, didn't he?
Yeah, he had a grandma in Peoria, and I think that's who told him he had to leave because the police kept coming to her asking about what Charlie's been up to. So she finally got enough money together and sent him on a bus to out west. So I think that's how he ended up in out in California.
It's wild. He was moving around from place to place. Like I say, he spent most of his time in prison. So being put back in prison was like going home to him. Yeah, it didn't bother him. But I'll never forget. I studied deep in the thing. Thank you there, Danette. I appreciate that sticker. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. That's the freaky thing he said. That was the most disturbing thing. He said, "You may lock me away for the rest of my life, but my spirit will walk your streets every night."
Oh,
that's not good, folks. There's which way you look at it. That is not good. Absolutely. But all that stuff is definitely satanic, girl. I mean, what else could it be? I mean,
right.
But these dark influences, the dark lives that we can live, the dark things that we can do, also can stain the land and the buildings that we do these things in.
Absolutely.
And like I said earlier, evil never dies, and its stain never goes away. It never really does, It's almost, and I always go back to the book of Genesis. What did God say when Cain unalived Abel, He said, "What have you done? The blood of your brother cries out from the ground to me." It's almost as if the ground takes that stain and retains it.
Oh. I was just watching a YouTube channel show about Cain and Abel, and they said that God's curse on Cain was they turned him into a Bigfoot, a wild man, to roam the earth forever, and that's why we have Bigfoot in the forest.
Yeah, I've heard that. That's interesting. And that's Nimrod too. Nimrod.
Yep.
Yeah, Nimrod. And there's another theory that actually the prototype for Dracula, and it's not really Vlad Tepes, the real Dracula, was supposed to be the cursed wandering Jew. And the real cursed wandering Jew, guess who that supposedly is? Judas Iscariot. He hung himself, but God cursed him to never die until the day of judgment for what he had done, for the ultimate betrayal. And so he is really like a vampire. He may be the Jacques Germain, okay, Saint Germain.
Right. They call him the wandering Jew.
I watched a movie not long ago called Dracula 2000. And if you've never seen it, you need to do yourself a favor and watch it. It's a pretty good movie. Stars Gerald Butler, by the way. He's a great actor. I like Gerald Butler. Anyway, he is really Judas Iscariot. And he tells the girl in that story, the daughter of Abraham Van Helsing, by the way, he tells her, he said, "I have been known by many names down through the many centuries." And he tells her his story that he is Judas Iscariot. And he tried to hang himself. Of course, the Bible says that Judas went and hung himself. And that another part of the Bible also says the rope broke and he body hit the ground, supposedly burst or, fell down into the valley or whatever and died. But what if God didn't curse him? I mean, didn't let him go out that easy, for what he did? What if he had to pay a very bad price by becoming a vampire or something like that? That's an interesting theory to think about. What if Dracula really was Judas Iscariot? That's wild. What we got here?
This is Merle's place there in New Orleans, where you talked about
Merle's place.
Saint Germain. So I thought I'd bring that picture up.
Yeah, Saint Germain. I'll tell you something about, I find fascinating about Saint Germain. Jerome, we need to do a show on him sometime. I think we did one time.
I think
We need to
so.
do a part two. Because he's a very fascinating character. And if he did show up in New Orleans as Jacques Saint Germain, and his real name may be Jacques, I have no idea about that. That sounds very similar to Judas, does it not?
Yes, it does.
Um, the that would be the perfect city for him to hide in. And that's what I said to somebody the other day. Even if they run him out of the city, he could come back. Another name, it wouldn't make any difference to him. He could do that. If you got all time to play with, you can get away. You can get away with a lot of stuff. You know what I mean?
Right.
But that's wild to think about stuff like that. But now, of course, if Saint Germain was an alchemist, and a lot of people paint alchemists as being evil, but some of them were not. They were sort of the first progenitors of chemistry. They were men, like Dr. John Dee and some of the others. They weren't really evil, although they spent a lot of time trying to do things to beat the laws of the universe. Turn stuff into gold, or the elixir of life that would make you live forever. But the philosopher's stone is
right.
That doesn't make them necessarily evil, but sometimes they were sort of shading themselves, I guess. But some alchemists were supposedly evil, and some were not. Just because you're an alchemist doesn't mean you're a sorcerer or you're evil or anything. It meant you were a learned man trying to understand properties of nature and the laws of the universe. So they were sort of scientists in many ways. And that's where real true science began. It's hard, of course, real science will not admit that to this day, but that's where science began, with alchemy in many ways, Yep. But there were some guys who pushed the boundaries of that, like Dr. John Dee, by the way, who strove to talk with angels, and he wanted to get the language of angels so that he could possibly control angels. I'm almost going to say men like that are not necessarily dark evil, but they're not really white and good either. They're kind of shaded. They're kind of gray in that respect. I often thought about Dr. John Dee. He was so smart, but yet he was going about things in a completely wrong way of looking at it. But that was his own opinion. Look at Jefferson. Jefferson one day decided to sit down and reorganize the Bible and cut out everything he didn't like on it. And I think he ended up with only a few pages. But sometimes you can be too smart, girl. For your own good. I'll never be accused of that, by the way. Well, that's fascinating. So if you go to stay at any hotels, motels, anything like that, you might want to check out the history first, huh? Or the restaurants you eat in. A lot of restaurants have got ghosts, there is one that I do know. I cannot think of the name of it, but I think it's in New Orleans, where you can be served by this waiter, and they say that it is a ghost sometimes. That the waiter,
right.
What it is, this waiter, she died on the way to work one morning somehow or another, involved in an accident, and she's still coming to work. And that some people complain about her. Where did my waitress go to? She'll take them down. And sometimes they give her the order and she doesn't come back. And
I've been waiting a long time for my food.
Because she's a waitress that's not exactly in our world with us right now. That's a bad problem. That would be a problem in a restaurant, definitely. The ghosts got to eat, right? No, I don't think they do. But anyway, it's been a fascinating interest there, Gerald. You got any more pictures you wanted to share with us before we close up here?
I was going to say that not all haunted hotels have to be on land. This is the Queen Mary that you can go stay on.
Yeah. That's another definite place I'd like to get on my bucket list.
So you can see ghostly apparitions on the Queen Mary. And of course, everybody, I think if they look up the Queen Mary, it was also a hospital during the wartime. So there was a lot of fatalities and bad stuff happening on the Queen Mary. And maybe some of that carried over.
Alexander Leslie says ghosts never eat or drink. Or do they eat and drink ghost food? That's an interesting thought. Well, they got the ghost of food that they eat. The reason I say that is because there's a very famous ghost story, very much like the one Gerald just got through telling about the restaurant, where this man dines in a castle one night. And there's a big feast going on, and all kinds of things he eats, with these. And he comes to find out the next day, he stayed there in the castle, and comes to find out there was no dinner that night. And he ended up eating dinner with a ghost. Okay. And the question of the story was that ghost food too? That's interesting to think about.
Well, the last picture I have is one of my favorites is the Dakota, where John Lennon was killed outside the Dakota.
Oh yeah, the Dakota. Wow.
And that is just a creepy.
You know what? Let me tell you this quick, Gerald. There are stories being told of people still hearing the gunshot in that location.
Yep, they say they can still hear John Lennon playing the piano and singing in the Dakota. Now, supposedly he died out on the sidewalk right outside the Dakota as he was entering.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the people that were there distinctly remember John Lennon entering the Dakota and dying inside of the building. But other people say that he actually died out on the sidewalk.
I think he died on the sidewalk. That's what I heard. But I've been heard a ghost report of actual ghostly gunshots around there. That's interesting. And the same thing is said about Ford's Theater as well. That once in a while, I'll tell you a quick story of some curators in Ford's Theater. One night they heard a noise like that, and one of the he was a new guy, and he said, "What was that?" And he said, "Oh, that's nothing." He said, "We hear that once in a while." And he said, "Well, what was that?" He said, "That's a gunshot." And he wouldn't say anything else. So there was only, I think one gunshot that night. And that was it. And that's what you're hearing is sort of the memory, the sound of what took place there. That would be freaky to think about. Matter of fact, I have a friend who actually was part of the park service, and she was with the guy that was a curator over some of the objects. I think one of the objects was John. Was the Derringer of John Wilkes Booth. And he said, "You want to hold that?" He was cleaning. It was his job of cleaning. He said, "You want to hold?" She said, "No, I don't think so." She wouldn't take. He said, "It's a piece of history," And she said, "Nah, I will decline." Okay. Because it has such a bad juju to it.
Right.
But I can understand why. I think I would have took it. But anyway, I think I would have looked at it. Anyway, that would be something to tell your grandkids about it. Absolutely.
Just a side note on the Dakota and John Lennon. Supposedly, he saw a UFO while he was out there at the Dakota. And he put it in one of his songs. You can go into the lyrics of one of his songs, and he mentions the UFO that he saw that night.
Yeah, I heard something about that. Yeah, he had some. He sort of had he was kind of in touch with the mystical side of things a little bit. John Lennon was,
Yep.
He wrote that along with Paul McCartney. He wrote that, very religious "Let It Be," which is a beautiful song. And it has a very mystical feel to it, So I think he was more in touch with it than some of the others were, stuff like that. But I've talked about that before, and I won't get into that tonight. But I think sometimes, for certain reasons, certain people are removed. And agents of evil will come after them and to remove them, whether they know at the time whether they really are agents themselves being used for those purposes. I think certain things like that are destined to happen under certain circumstances for certain reasons. But I won't get into that tonight. But anyway, you have to wonder about that, being at the wrong place at the wrong time. And somebody coming after you like that and all that stuff, that, you're acting out of destiny almost like, It's wild.
Yep.
But, yeah. And like with Lincoln and other people, it's almost, that's what I think it was Wadsworth that said, if there was to be anyone assassinated, I would have picked him out to be that. That would have been his tragic ending. Even if it had not happened, I would have picked some,
Right.
if we were writing a story about it, that's what would have happened. It's almost as if it was predetermined or predestined. Wow, to think about it. But anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, there's even ghostly appearances of Lincoln reported in places.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, especially the White House.
Oh, yeah.
You would think it would be Ford Theater, wouldn't you? I mean, you would think it was somebody
Ford Theater, or even places here in Illinois that he spent his childhood and growing up as a young lawyer. Mm-hmm. But nope, it's the White House.
Well, of course, he went through a lot of trauma at the White House, a lot of emotional. He had some children that died there.
Right.
Had a lot of stuff going on. I think that has a lot in play with that. Wherever you've had a lot of great emotional attachments and stuff, that it tends to do that. Definitely. But anyway, what you got any final thoughts on that, Gerald? Before we wrap it up.
Just like what you said before, be careful where you go and stay. You never know, and check it out online and make sure the place actually exists. This not a doorway in an alley like Dennis talked about, where one night it's there and another night it's gone.
Yep, absolutely. And wherever you eat or check in at, you might want to ask, do you have ghosts to go? Okay, just in case. But you might not want them to go home with you. Okay, yeah. Definitely not.
I want to take my food to go, not the ghosts.
I'll say right quick about the Burger King I investigated. It was not a really 100% investigation, folks, but to this day, it is still haunted. And I found out the reason why it might possibly be haunted. But I had to investigate with people sitting in there eating, okay? So I'm walking around with a meter trying to be as very inconspicuous as possible, which is very hard to do. But I'm just walking around checking things out with an EMF meter, okay? And I'm looking around trying to be inconspicuous about it. But it is supposedly haunted by the ghost of a child named Master Dan. They call him Master Dan. There's even a picture that they have of him. I'll have to try to get that sometime. Wow. Anyway, he pinches the girls that work there a lot, and he, knocks pans on the floor, does all kinds. It's sort of like a poltergeist in a way too. But I found out the history of that place where that restaurant was built. That there once had been a farmhouse there. On one side of it, an old farmhouse, and on one other side of it was a pond, and the pond was about where the back end of this Burger King is, where the drive-through and the parking lot was where the pond was. And I found out one other interesting thing: a child drowned in that pond, a young boy.
Wow.
So that's the haunted Burger King. Okay. I asked Burger King let me stay all night, but of course we don't do that. When we close, we close. That's it. Well, I can understand insurance purposes, of course. Yeah.
Right.
But it would have been interesting. But to this day, I still get reports coming in to me. He's still there doing his stuff. He ain't leaving. Yeah. I asked him, and I said, "You want me to do something? You know, kind of, no, we won't keep him, I guess." Gives the place character. So be careful where you go, folks. You don't want to get too much character there, okay?
Right.
And especially the haunts of serial killers and places like that, you might want to avoid. Absolutely. But just be careful out there. And like we always say, keep your head on the swivel, your eyes on your six, keep your wits about them, and keep them sharp. Because you never know what you're going to run or walk into or run into.
That's right.
It's the interesting thing, you know. I think we exist unknowingly or knowingly. We exist between worlds, some that are seen and some that are unseen. Parts of our existence. We always need to take that, my friends, into consideration. Absolutely. Well, it's been a very interesting show tonight, and I want to thank all of you for being here, joining in with us. Gerald, what you got coming up this week, my friend?
Well, we're going to have the Night Owl Lounge again on Wednesday night, 10 p.m. Central, and we'll be on after you and to hang out with the chats. It's going to be a hangout, and we'll probably do some cryptid and UFO reports and stuff like we normally do and just talk with everybody. And then Sunday, we have Bryce from Esoteric Atlanta coming on our show, and we're going to continue the series of the Egyptian culture and probably into Tartarian mud floods and all that stuff. And if anybody saw our show the other night with Mark Alley on Crystal Skulls, he's going to come back on with us, and he lives in a haunted house. So we're actually going to be talking about the subject we're talking tonight. We're going to talk about his experiences living in a haunted house.
Yeah, sounds interesting. Definitely some more haunted stuff. All right. Yeah. All right. Well, appreciate you all being here tonight. And Wednesday night, of course, we will have another edition of Hunting the Shadows at 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Hunting the Shadows YouTube podcast channel. And Friday night, we'll come along with a paranormal point of view. And we'll be talking about that book that I'm writing written the foreword on for D.A. Winesong. We'll talk about that a little bit Friday night and some other stuff. And I may give you more detailed interest in that Dracula 2000. Very interesting movie. And we'll talk about that some. And Thursday, I will be appearing once again with Chantel Mayberg on Aquarius Rising. I'm going to be talking about 1816, the year without summer. Okay.
Oh.
And it's going to be how it kind of relates, I think, to a little biblical prophecy as well. I'm going to get deeper, and I've been doing some more research on that, and we will definitely have to talk about that one day, Drew, about the darkness and all that, supposedly, and prophetic
Little
stuff
Ice Age
about that, and wormwood and all that. Boy, it's fascinating stuff. Fascinating. Anyway, that will be coming up on there as well, and we'll be back, God willing, the creeks don't rise next Monday for another edition of The Road Less Traveled. Absolutely. Gerald's driving the bus.
That's right. Same bat channel, same bat time.
Yeah, that's right. But we appreciate you all so very much for being here. We appreciate your support. And absolutely, with all our hearts, we appreciate what you do for us and joining us here and listening to us for about an hour and a half at least, and prattle on about ghosts and all that stuff. So who knows what we'll get into next time. But you come back and find out, okay? Absolutely. So until we get together again, my friends, be careful out there, and be careful where you eat and where you sleep. And like Earl says, you might want to sleep with one eye open, definitely. But we appreciate you so very much. And until we get back together again, Godspeed, my friends. and I will see you in the shadows. Good night.
Night, everybody.